Now that we've created and gotten the API key, we're ready to make a request using the JavaScript code. So getting the API key, we're going to build the request URL and then output that into the console. We can click it, test it, open it up within the browser to see the data that's going to be returned back. So this is within a JSON format. And then creating a page element, which is going to be a button, and that's going to serve as the trigger to make our fetch request to the URL, return the data back, and for now we're going to output the data items value into the console in preparation for looping through it and then outputting the results onto our web page. So once you've set up your developer environment, you are going to need to have a Google account in order to get an API key and to register your application. So going over to the Google Cloud platform, so that's available at console.google.com, and then opening up the /APIS/dashboard, this will bring you to your dashboard. So I already do have a few projects in my dashboard, so it's by default going to those projects, but the route for the dashboard is going to be this, where you've got an opportunity to create a brand new project. And that's what we're going to do here up at the top, where we've got this drop-down menu of the existing projects. I can pop open the new window, and then within here we've got an option to create new project. So let's go ahead and add a project. And of course I already do have some existing projects that I've used in other courses. So selecting the new project, let's create a brand new project, new, and I'll call it new YouTube, and hit create. And now we need to enable the YouTube Data API as a service within our project. So let's select that as our project. And within the Google Cloud platform, you can see what project you're currently on here within the drop-down. So make sure that the project that you've just created or that you've selected is the one that you have on the screen. So right now I do see that I've got my new YouTube project. So this is the one that I've just created. And we need to add services to this project. So within the API dashboard, you've got enable APIs and services. So go ahead and select that button. And that will give you a listing of services that are available within the Google Cloud platform. And the one that we're looking for is going to be the YouTube one. So you can select the YouTube within the filter of the categories, and presents us with several different YouTube options. The one that we want to enable and select is going to be the YouTube Data API. So make sure the status is on for this service. You can click it, and that's going to open up the service, and you've got a couple options here to enable and then to try the API. So go ahead and select enable. So this will enable the YouTube Data API version 3 within this new YouTube project that I've just created. And that will also allow me to create my key within the create credentials, and then we can use that in order to make and access the YouTube Data API. There's also some tutorials and documentation, so there's quite a lot of options within the Google Cloud platform. So in order to use the API, you need credentials. So that's clicking that create credentials button. So that will open up and allow you to create credentials. It's going to ask you which API are you using. And the one that we do want to use is the YouTube Data API v3. And then it's going to ask us what data we'll be accessing. So what data we want to access with the API. And I just want to access the regular public data. So any publicly available data that's already within the YouTube. And let's select next. And this generates an API key. So go ahead and copy that key. So these are the credentials that we can use in order to access the API. And then once it's available within the project, you're going to see that you do have the API keys available within the project. It's got the creation date, any of the restrictions, and the key. And then you can always access the key. You can also edit the key, and you can delete the key. And it gives you some more information about the key itself, any of the restrictions. So currently I don't have any restrictions, application restrictions. So there's no application restrictions, but you can restrict it to various IP addresses, Android apps, iOS, or HTTP referrers for different websites. And then, of course, you can always generate a brand new key. So let's go back to the editor, which I have open on the left-hand side, and open up to our web page. And then within the JavaScript code, I create a variable called API key, and that's where I'm going to drop that API key that I've just copied from my Google Cloud services. I'm going to apply the word wrap so we can see the entire code from the editor. So next up, what we want to do is we want to search. So let's create a search term. And this is, I'm just going to create a default one, and we're going to be able to update this afterwards. So the search term that we're going to be looking for is going to be just, actually we'll just call it JavaScript as the search term. Actually, we'll just search under my last name to see what content is going to come up for that search term. Let's create our URL. And using the template literals, so the backticks, and the URL is going to be the googleapis.com/YouTube/v3/search in order to search the API. And then the parameters that we're searching, so equaling it to part. So we want to turn back the snippet. Want to add in the key that we're using. So this is the API key. And I'm using the template literals. So that's where you can use the $sign and the curly brackets to get the variable value of the API key and include that within my request string. Next, the Q so this is the term that we're going to be querying. And this is where we can add in our search term value. And then lastly, we can set also the results. So there's various parameters that you can set. And in this case, we're going to set the number of results to return back 20 result items. Let's output the URL into the console. So there's our output. And this is what we're going to be getting returned back. And this is going to be a large JSON object. So let's add that functionality to the page now, where we'll select the page element and using document and query selector and select the element with a class of output. And then we can use that as our parent element to add other additional elements into it. So for now, I'm just going to create a button and using the document create element, and the element type that we're going to create is going to be a button. And for the button, let's add some text content to the button, get data. Lastly, let's append that to the web page and apply a little bit of styling to it. So we'll display that as block, so it gets its own line for the button, and that should be actually button style. So save that, and now we've got a button. Let's make the button clickable, and this is where we're going to add in our fetch request. So add event listener. The event that we're going to be listening for is going to be a click. And then this can trigger our fetch request to the URL as the endpoint. Then we can return back the data. Right now we'll return back the data into the console, and then afterwards we can output it on the page once we've got the data that we're able to pull in. So using fetch, we're fetching to the URL. This is going to be returned back as JSON data. So we can see that within the result there. So let's return back that result. So this is the response object. And the response is going to be returned back as JSON and then move it to the next stage of the promise. And then the next promise is where we can retrieve back that as a variable value called data. And we'll output that result into the console. So let's see what happens when we click the button. We'll clear and we make the request. So that returns back items. So it returns back 20 items within the items array. And we can use this, and we can use any one of these object properties in order to make more requests, get the next request page, next token, and so on, in order to pull back even more data. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the data items, since this is an array and this is one that we can iterate through and output the results on the page. So we get this type of result. So they're all formatted the same way, where we've got the index value, and then we've got an object contained in there. And within the ID, we've got kind, we've got a video ID, and then it's got some object properties and information. So from the video ID, we can return back the URL. We can create the URL. And then from the snippet, we've got the channel ID, channel title, the description, publish time, thumbnails, title. So it gives us a whole bunch of information that we can use, and we can output this information onto the page. So once you're able to establish a connection to the API, you're going to be ready to move on to the next step, where we're going to output this content onto the page. And when we'll update the search value as well, the user can enter in a customized search value. So that's all coming up